Hello, the probably 4 to 8 of you who are still with me in creative writing. Uh, as you're about to begin your short story, I wanted to go over a few things, specifically point of view and tense. If we had been in class, there would have been some fun point of view group activities. If you're interested in those activities, email me. I'll be happy to share them, and you can do them with people in class virtually, do them alone. But either way out there, I want to go over it, and there's some stuff I want you to be aware of. And that starts with what point of view is, if you don't know. That is the perspective from which you write. Each has its strengths, each has its weaknesses. But you need to consider what effect you want your story to have, and then consider the point of view you want to write from. With that said, I will go over the main ones. First person. I saw the cardinal. Well, I heard the cardinal first. After hearing his nasal call, I looked in the tree and saw his bright red plumage juxtaposed against the dying leaves of the sugar maple tree. The narrator is also, in first person, the narrator is also a character, usually but not always the protagonist in the story. This is the most personal and most emotional of the types of point of views. The reader has a strong emotional connection with the protagonist immediately. If you're looking for that emotional element, or maybe you're working really heavily in suspense, this is an area where you might consider it writing in first person, probably present tense. The thing is, in terms of weaknesses, you as the writer need to be aware of the limitations of your narrator. Your narrator cannot know that there is a murderer behind the tree because the narrator can't see behind the tree. Your narrator can't write about looking embarrassed because the narrator cannot actually see themselves. You need to decide how also, as it concerns first person, you need to decide how reliable the narrator is, and you need to be consistent and be aware that the audience sees the narrator in a certain point of view. People lie to themselves and others, so why would a character in a story be any different? So there is what's called an unreliable narrator, and in first person, this could be a notable point of view. That is first person point of view. Then there is third person limited. He heard the cardinal. He cocked his head toward the tree and then jumped around when the cardinal began his nasal song. As soon as the cardinal spotted him, he turned to look for his mate. Way back when, I mentioned third person limited, and I told you this is still limited to the point of view of one character, but the narrator, while limited, is not the same as the character. So if you think about it in terms of a camera, first person point of view, the camera is inside your brain. It's behind your eyes. As far as the character is concerned, third person limited, the camera is on the character's shoulder. It is not in their head, but it is limited to that point of view. But as I told you way back when you're doing your vignettes, this is the most forgiving of the points of view. You are not bound to the strict limitations of your first person. You get away with Jackie looked embarrassed. But you also don't need to be aware of everything the other third-person points of view require, which I'll go over shortly. You still need to be aware that the narrator's perspective is limited to what one character experiences. The third major point of view is third-person omniscient. The narrator knows everything about everyone in the story. The narrator is godlike. The cardinal began his song. The man had been walking along, but the song stopped him dead in his tracks. He turned to face the sound. 500 yards away, another man was hiding behind an oak tree, watching him intently. His hand was fingering something in his pocket. There are so many perspectives that it's difficult. The third person omniscient, just to be clear, there are so many perspectives that it's difficult to establish an emotional connection with the reader. Furthermore, the reader is aware you know everything. That means a certain amount of distrust is created if you don't reveal everything. The reader knows you know stuff, so why would you tell it? A few of you, there are a few other points of view, but I want you to be aware of, but I highly recommend you do not consider them. And going back to third person omniscient, I didn't mention, but I do want to say, I wouldn't suggest this with a short story. When you write a novel, feel free, but short story, this probably won't work. Anyway, a few others I want you to be aware of, but I highly recommend you don't consider. Third person multiple. The narrator could switch between characters and relate the story from each character's perspective at separate times. It is still limited because the narrator is still limited to the character they're following at that point in the writing. This is another one. If you ever write a novel, consider this, but I would not suggest this with a 3 to 5 page short story. Second person. The narrator uses the pronoun you to drive the story. You walk down the tracks and see a beehive. You grab a stick and... the primary usage for this point of view is choose your own adventure. If you've ever read a choose your own adventure. I collect choose your own adventure books, by the way. There's a little known fact about me. The thing about this is it tends to sound gimmicky when used otherwise, though second person can and has been done. But usually it is by people who are established and are trying to do something that's kind of very avant-garde or experimental. If you're trying to use second person, you are either an unsophisticated writer still hasn't fully graduated from writing in second person, because it's kind of unsophisticated in any form of writing, and you're trying way too hard to write something experimental. As I've said, maybe someday when you're published and talked about in literary circles, you can try second person. Now, would suggest it. So, those are the major points of view. Generally, I would suggest either first person or third person limited. If you're still not sure what would work for you, what would work for your story, I suggest you take your character, put them in a random situation that may or may not ever make it to the actual story. For example, they go to the store, they clean the bathroom, they water the plants, they take the dog for a walk, whatever. Write about it in each of the 3 major points of view. First person, third limited, and third omniscient. See what works best and go with it. That's points of view. Whatever you do, you have to be consistent with it. I will mention that. And then there's tense. Past tense or present tense. Those are your choices. This corresponds with point of view because let's say you're writing in first person past tense. The audience is aware. You know how all of this is going to turn out. You know what happened. You know everything. And then the audience, again, kind of doesn't trust you because you're not letting them in on everything, which may be fine or may not be fine, but that's up to you. Present tense is more suspenseful, but again, you need to be aware of the limitations of what you, as the narrator, know. You do not know if it's truly in present tense, what's going to happen in the future. Past tense, you know more. Technically, you know how the whole thing's going to turn out. And past tense is overall more forgiving, but you still need to be aware of how the audience views you. Whatever you choose, make sure you're consistent. It makes for a really bumpy ride when you're switching from past to present and back again, quite unintentionally, and it's a bumpy ride. If you're still really not sure, let me just stress, third person limited in past tense will always allow you the most mistakes. It will always allow you be the most forgiving. The other ones are really tough, or tougher anyway. So what's next for you? Nothing is due this week. The first draft of the story is shared with me on May 1st in 2 weeks. What exactly are you writing? You're writing a 3 to 5 page short story. You have shared with me your story idea, and I'm going to look at it and get back to you by the end of the day on Monday. The short story rubric is on Canvas. I'm sure I'll make a video or 2 next week going over this, that, and the other odd thing. But basically, nothing is due for me until 2 weeks from now. That's May 1st, at which time you on Google share with me the first draft of your story and I look it over. If you have any questions or just need feedback or want me to look at what you've got so far, feel free to share it with me, email me, whatever. I'm around. I'm just starting to get comfortable with this whole only so many people participate thing, and I'm trying to enjoy it and take nice walks and listen to the birds because I'm finally getting healthy. I hope you're all healthy. Have a good week. Let me know if you have any questions.